Good morning, Trinity Episcopal Church.
Good morning.
Good to be with you this morning. My name is Rick Stravers. The last time I was here, I drove from Kalamazoo, so I drove east to get here. This weekend, I've been taking care of a grandson in Ann Arbor, so today I drove here from the other direction. It's good to be with you this morning. Here we are in this beautiful church, listening to beautiful music, listening also to some of the thoughts and discoveries of our ancestors in faith in the lessons from the Scriptures. In a little while, we'll be praying our concerns together. We've already done some praying. We'll do some more. And we are celebrating our communion with God in this gathering together, and we're supporting each other in all of that, which is a good thing to do on a summer morning. I want to take a moment, or invite you to take a moment, to help ourselves arrive here this morning, to come home to ourselves here this morning. I'd like to do that by just inviting you to take a couple conscious breaths. I suggest you watch yourself take a breath in and hold it there for just a second, and then observe as you breathe the breath out. Let's do a couple of those together to arrive here. Breathe in, pause, and breathe out. Breathe in, we pause, and we breathe out. We can welcome ourselves home this morning, home to the love of God, home to ourselves, home in this vast creation, home to our planet Earth. What I hope for our time together this morning is that we can use it as an opportunity to find some inner resources for life. We live in a challenging time. It's possible to discover resources within ourselves for living with love, with joy, and with peace. 75 years ago yesterday, Anne Frank's diary was published. The young woman who wrote a diary about her life in hiding with her family, hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam. She wrote this: "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single minute before starting to improve the world." I love her fresh spirit. We don't need to wait a single minute before starting to improve the world in some way, before starting to embrace ourselves, our lives, and engage the challenges and difficulties in our world. We don't need to wait a single minute before we start to turn to the Spirit of God within us and the Spirit of God in our world. This week, as I was preparing for our worship today, I felt drawn to our second lesson, the lesson from St. Paul. The last sentence of that lesson is actually what hooked me the most. Paul writes, "If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit." What could that mean? Paul says, we live by the Spirit, which I guess means by the life of God within us. And he says, since that's how it is, Let's allow that Spirit to guide us. So I want to think with you about that, what that might be like today. So when we center our hearts and minds and bodies in awareness, we discover there's an inner space within us, an inner life. And when we ground ourselves a bit in that spirit, that life within us, we find a treasure there. More treasures than one, actually. So in a way, Paul is giving us a little treasure map in this one sentence in the epistle reading today. He's telling us that in the Spirit within us, we can find gifts for our lives. The mystery of our inner spirit, of our inner life, is one of the great mysteries of life. Our inner life arises from the Spirit of God, and if we reject that inner life and refuse its gifts, then Paul says, we find ourselves anchoring our life in things like envy and anger and fear and so forth. He gives a long list. But he says, as we center ourselves in the Spirit within us, the Spirit of God in us, we find resources for things like joy and love and courage. So is this reality? St. Paul onto something? Or is this just silly talk? When I thought that question this week, I thought about a book that my kids and I used to read when my daughters were young. We read a book, I think the title of it was, "And Rain Makes Applesauce." And one of there was a repeated refrain in the book that was this: "Oh, you're just talking silly talk." And it was really fun to read that and to say that over and over again. You're just talking silly talk. When Anne Frank says, "Isn't it wonderful that nobody need wait even a single minute before starting to improve the world," is she just talking silly talk? When St. Paul says, "Since we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit," is he just talking silly talk? Well, we can't help but wonder, I think. But I don't think so. I don't think so. We don't need to take Paul's word for it. Of course, if he's correct, we can explore this for ourselves and see what we discover. I think there's a mystery here that's worth respecting and investigating. We can explore to see if you and I have within us resources for life in the Spirit of God. We have an interior a spiritual interior. It's not a place that we can photograph or pinpoint. We can't plug it into our GPS system and have a voice lead us to it. But still, we all do have an interior, an inner room, a heart of hearts. And this is a space within us that we could say makes a tent for God's Spirit. Or it's like a sail catching the breeze of the Spirit of God, or like an altar, or like a temple. The key thing about a temple is not the outer walls, although sometimes they're very beautiful. The key thing about a temple is the inner spaciousness there. the mystery within the temple. From one perspective, a temple is empty space, but this empty space is where the treasure dwells. In our baptismal vows, we say that we will seek and serve Christ in all persons. And when we say this, we're referring to this inner mystery within each person. We say we respect the dignity of every human person, and that's referring to that same inner mystery. It's important to recognize that this applies to us too. Paul suggests that God's Spirit abides within us like a fruit tree, and it bears all kinds of fruit. Sometimes we think that means we have to sort of force those fruits or push ourselves or nag ourselves into expressing those fruits. But I don't think we can force them or coerce them. We discover them. And we may find the gifts of God's Spirit subtly, gently within us in that way. So, our inner being is a temple for the Spirit of God, and this is your human dignity and my human dignity. And when we respect this dignity, we might find some subtle and beautiful treasures, resources for our life. So here's what I want to just recommend to you to consider. Since we are alive with the Spirit of God, why not explore? Why not investigate? And look for the resources that Paul says we can find for lives of love, of joy, of peace and patience and gentleness. May God bless you as you seek to be open to those gifts, which St. Paul says are already within us. That's the good news that I wanted to share with you this morning. Amen.